Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Dialogue. I'm Taimur Shamil. Pakistan is a resilient nation and it has faced many challenges in the last 73 years. Let it be the wars that Pakistan has fought with India in its own defense. Let it be the challenges that have been there in the region, counter-terrorism for that matter, the things that have been happening in Afghanistan, and recently the way we see the aggression from the Indian side. Pakistan has fought all these challenges in a very brave way. Pakistan is a resilient nation, as I already said, and with armed forces which are powerful and resilient the way Pakistani nation is. We'll be talking about the challenges that have been there for Pakistan in terms of defense, national security and foreign policy. Since Pakistan would be celebrating its Defense Day on 6th September, we'll be discussing about specifically defense and national security and foreign policy, and still the challenges that are there for Pakistan, the opportunities that are there for Pakistan on which we can work and strengthen Pakistan. We are joined by our special guest in the studios. Our first guest is Mr. Air Vice Marshal Ikramullah Bhatti, renowned senior defense analyst and expert on Pakistan's national security. Sir, welcome to the show. Our second guest is Mr. Javed Siddique, renowned senior journalist and expert on Pakistan's foreign policy and internal affairs as well. So, welcome to the show. Also, we'll be joined by Lieutenant General retired Raza Muhammad Khan on Skype. He's a renowned senior defense analyst and former president of National Defense University, Islamabad. I welcome General Raza. AVM Bhatti, starting with this day of 6th September, although we'll be celebrating Defense Day, but for the last 73 years, the challenges for Pakistan, I would say, have been immense in terms of security, the wars that Pakistan has fought, but the way we have countered the threat that has been emanating from the eastern border, from the western border for that matter, internally the way things have been. How do you see the whole situation and the events that took place in last 73 years?
Well, you see, right from the outset, Pakistan was created or was allowed to, create itself with a concept and a belief from the Indian side that this country would not survive for more than 6 months. And on their own, they did undertake certain measures to make this happen in terms of holding our share of funds, holding our share of military assets, and this area not being very industrialized, and of course burdening it with millions of refugees. But Alhamdulillah, Pakistan not only survived but thereafter moved on from strength to strength. But the fact remains that right from the outside, Pakistan had a security threat, whereas when it joined the Western Bloc and they came in to assist us in our building of our defense capability after the SEATO and CENTO, while the Americans were under the premise that all the military assistance being given to Pakistan is essentially to fight communism, whereas Pakistan was very clear that all this capability is essentially to defend itself against its enemy, that's India. And that was the reason that when we did go to war in 1965, the Americans quickly put an embargo that we have used their supplied equipment against India, not against communists. And of course, that love-hate relationship continued with the Americans, and it continues even till today. And which was essentially, as in the foreign affairs term, we call it, it was a transactional relationship.
And the threat from the Indian side, that too persists.
That too persisted. And it was only when Vajpayee visited Lahore, and he went to the place where Minar-e-Pakistan, where of course Pakistan resolution was approved and adopted. And he was quite criticized for it, because his visiting that place was in fact, according to the Indians, an acceptance of the reality of Pakistan, which was not their
acceptable
narrative
to the
Indians.
Right.
And I mean that is for the first time that it came to light in a very clear manner that what was the Indian mindset. I mean, after more than nearly 50 years of Pakistan's creation, that they had by then not accepted the reality of the existence of Pakistan.
Right.
So, and from there on, of course, we see that the world started to change. We had this American influence in Middle East increasing, and they needed a reason to be here in our neighborhood. We had this 9/11, then the before that, of course, the Russians had come in, and then, of course,
Right.
our society became overly religious.
We'll come on the western border as well, but Mr. Siddique, talking about this same issue, the aggression from the Indian side, that has been there. We have fought wars in our own defense because war was imposed on Pakistan from the Indian side, even talking about 1965 for that matter. Even before that, we talk about Kashmir and all that. How do you see the Indian aggression, the way persistently they have been working on it, undermining Pakistan's security, trying to threaten it, and the way Pakistan has countered the Indian aggression, and till date, I would say?
Well, Mr. Bhatti has pointed out very clearly that India was challenging the security of Pakistan since its creation. And the first war that was imposed on Pakistan was on the issue of Kashmir, which is 1948 war. And Pakistan was fighting for the liberation of Kashmir as well as defending its own frontiers. And then it was India which went to United Nations Security Council for a ceasefire. And that was the first war that Pakistan fought with India, just 1 year after its creation. And subsequently, the 1965 war, it was a surprise attack on Pakistan. There was no reason, no justification for it. But I think the Indians were trying to realize or their dream of disintegrating Pakistan, which they did later on in 1971. So we have faced aggressive policies and aggression from India in every sense of the word. They attacked Pakistan physically with weapons. They tried to internally destabilize Pakistan through the terrorist activities. And there are numerous examples where the Indians are involved in destabilizing Pakistan internally. In the very early days, they started patronizing the issue of Pakhtunistan.
Right.
Then there were other, now in Balochistan, you know what they are doing in Balochistan. They are actively involved in destabilizing the most strategic province of Pakistan. So they are continuing to do it. They are trying to destabilize Pakistan in every sense of the word.
And the way Pakistan has countered it.
But Pakistan, first Pakistan was able to repulse the attack of 1965. And India was 6 times bigger than Pakistan. Its military might, plus its size, its economy and everything. And Pakistani nation was very resilient. It was united, and Pakistani nation and the armed forces of Pakistan effectively repulsed that attack. And you know, the Indians generals, the Indian military commanders had made a tall claim that in the evening of September 6, they will be enjoying drinks in Gymkhana Club, Lahore. And Pakistan, didn't allow them to realize this nefarious design. And Pakistan fought a very, very aggressive war by India. And in Chivinda, Sialkot, it was the biggest ever war of tanks, as the military experts tell us, that after World War II, it was the biggest tanks war in this part of the world. So I think Pakistan has been thwarting all the Indian efforts, both in the military term, in terms of it defending its internal security and keeping harmony, and on all fronts Pakistan has been fighting very effectively.
Right, and interestingly, the new front is the propaganda that emanates from India. That too is a big challenge that Pakistan is working on. General Raza, talking about this whole scenario, since Pakistan will be celebrating its Defence Day on 6 September, how do you see the situation at the moment and historical events in national security perspective? How do you see them?
Okay, Bismillah Rahman Rahim. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, as this program is dedicated to the defense and security of Pakistan, I think I would like to begin first with a prayer and then with a vow. And the prayer is that may the Almighty rest in eternal peace the souls of all those who gave their lives for the defense of Pakistan. And may they continue to rejoice in the bounty provided by Allah. And I think the vow for the entire nation should be that we rededicate ourselves to the cause of the freedom, liberty, peace, and prosperity of Pakistan and vow to guard it against all forms of threats and challenges, whether they are external or internal. Now, coming to the answers to your question, I'd like to start from 1947. You know, at the time of partition, the total strength of the combined strength of the armed forces was 400,000, out of which Pakistan received only 15,000 personnel without any weapons, arms, and equipment. We had no tanks, no guns, no artillery, no aircrafts whatsoever. And because we were absolutely defenseless, so about 1 million people were mercilessly butchered by the Hindus and the Sikhs, and between 11 and 12 million were displaced from their homes. So that was one of the greatest sacrifices that the people of Pakistan, at the time of its creation, they offered those sacrifices. Now, in December 1947, the Qaid declared that although, and I quote, although the battle of Pakistan's freedom had been won, a grimmer battle to preserve that freedom was still in progress, and that battle had to be fought to a successful conclusion if Pakistan were to survive as a great nation. I think this is applicable even today. Going on thereafter, you know, to the 1948 war, which was briefly mentioned by the other guests, uh, the war in Kashmir was started by the Indian on the basis of a ghost or a false instrument of accession. And Mountbatten and Nehru, they had started transportation of the Indian armies in Srinagar Valley, and they had dropped like more than 10 brigades. And at that time, the Qaid had ordered the then commander-in-chief of the Pakistan Army, Sir General Douglas D. Gracie, you know, to do something from this side, either to contact Lord Mountbatten and to tell him to stop this, or whatever forces we had here, to dispatch those forces to stop the Indian aggression in Kashmir. But unfortunately, General Gracie did not listen to the Qaid.
Right,
And then
right.
at that time, whatever forces we
General
had,
Raza, General Raza, sorry to interrupt you. We'll continue our discussion on this specific point, and especially Kashmir that you raised up is very important. And when it comes to Pakistan's national security and foreign policy, Kashmir is top of the agenda. We'll take a break, and after the break, we'll be right back. Welcome back. We are discussing Pakistan's national security, its defense, and primarily that Pakistan would be celebrating its Defense Day on 6 September. General Raza, talking about this whole situation, you talked about Kashmir, which is Pakistan's top priority in its foreign policy and national security. The way Indian aggression has been going on in Indian occupied Kashmir, and the way they have been showing aggression to Pakistan from the eastern border, and interestingly the way they have been using the western border of Pakistan. For that I mean, by that I mean Afghanistan. They have been supporting and instigating terrorist organizations from there. How do you see this India's strategy, evolving strategy, and the way Pakistan has countered it?
Okay, I will answer this question, but let me complete my previous argument. On the issue of Kashmir, at the time, as I was saying, Pakistan had those 15,000 troops and it had nothing else. And the Qaid was actually forced to ask volunteers and reservists, to quickly form up and to stop the Indian aggression in Kashmir. And it succeeded. And as it was said, the Indians themselves went to the Security Council on the promise that there will be a plebiscite, which they have never completed. Again, in 1965, I think once Nehru and others before him and after him, they started, a number of political measures, to try and integrate the Kashmiris into the mainstream. And once they failed, again, in frustration, they attacked Pakistan, from many directions, Lahore, Sialkot, and a number of other directions. And in response, once the counter-offensive was launched from the Khem side, it is on record that the Indians were so unnerved that they were prepared, to leave their position and withdraw east of the Beas River. But again, they were the one who went to the Security Council and to the Russians and asked for a ceasefire. So in both cases, I think if Pakistan had not respected the ceasefire, then perhaps, the whole of Kashmir would have been with us in 1948 and in 1965. I think our army would have advanced and liberated even the Indian Punjab. And then, of course, the story of 1971 is known to all of us. That was a story of, political crisis and conflict and disunity. And at the time, I want to mention that India had more than 8-1 superiority in ground forces, 11-1 in the Air Force, and 12-1 in the Navy. But despite that, I think our troops gave them tremendous fight on every sector, and this was acknowledged by the Indians themselves also. The story of the first Soviet occupation of Afghanistan is very well known, and at that time, between 1979 and 1989, 3 million Afghan refugees came in, along with many criminals and also hostile intelligence agents, and many of them have never gone back. And now we are aware of the events of the last 19 years, post 9/11. The total casualties that the armed forces of Pakistan have suffered in these 19 years are many times more than all the casualties that we have suffered in all the previous 3 wars with India. But unfortunately, this point is lost upon the international community, and Pakistan is not being given the credit that it deserves. So the present situation, yes,
Right.
the present situation.
I'll continue
very
with
clear, and I
you on
think,
this point.
right.
On Afghanistan, let me also ask Air Vice Marshal Bhatti. Sir, General Raza rightly mentioned Afghanistan, because there are many fronts that Pakistan has been working on. We're still working on those fronts. Challenge from the eastern border, as we were discussing earlier, from the western border as well. Afghanistan has been an issue, and terrorist organizations have been operating in Afghanistan and primarily supported and financed by India, by RAW, its intelligence agency. TTP was operating once inside Pakistan, massive sorry यार पता नहीं मैं दोबारा करेंगे अच्छा चलो Air Vice Marshal Bhatti, talking about this. Air Vice Marshal Bhatti, talking about this challenges that we see from both sides, eastern and western border, the way terrorist organizations have been operating from Afghanistan. They still do, by the way. Jamaatul Ahrar and Hezbollah Ahrar, they have merged, and they also pose a threat to Pakistan, and keeping in mind that these 2 organizations have been financed and supported by India. How do you see this situation from the western border?
Well, it's unfortunate that we have been facing this threat from Afghanistan for a very long time. And as was mentioned a little while earlier, that we had this issue of Pakhtunistan soon after our independence, and then Afghanistan became a safe haven for criminals from Pakistan who would indulge into organized crime and then go and take refuge in Afghanistan. And then we also saw that separatist movement started to get sponsored from there, supported from there, especially in the case of Balochistan. And then when the Russians came into Afghanistan, and Pakistan helped the Afghan resistance movement and till the eviction of Russians from Afghanistan. And that time again, the Russians supported separatist movement and created unrest in this in the Balochistan province specifically. So, we had this problem from Afghanistan ever since, and then we have also seen that the government in Kabul has not been having any writ on all the territory. So, spaces were available to these terrorist organizations, to the criminal elements to go and take refuge, hide over there, even run their training camps and launch operations from there. And unfortunately, that continues even till today. And we know that the heinous act of attack on the APS in 2014 was masterminded, orchestrated and controlled from Afghanistan by TTP. And ever since then, we have also seen several acts of similar nature have been conducted by them in Pakistan. And then we also know that India actually increased the number of its consulates, especially along the Pak-Afghan border. And now that you just mentioned these two organizations, Hizbul Ahrar and Tehreek al-Ahrar, Jamaat al-Ahrar, they have merged into TTP again.
Yes.
And they have clearly identified their intended targets to be the security forces of Pakistan. So, it is now very clear that the only entity, the only support that they have to undertake their operations is from India. And but at the same time, we also know that whereas Mullah Fazlullah was operating in Afghanistan for a very long time, and from day one Pakistan had reported his presence in Afghanistan to the Americans, and de facto Americans were controlling Afghanistan. They had all the resources of intelligence, they have all the resources of undertaking precision attack using their drones. But it took them 4 years, even more, to actually locate and destroy him or get rid of him. So, if TTP has been allowed to enjoy a safe haven over there, I think the Americans probably overlooked or condoned their presence over there.
Right.
So, for quite a while it was not just Indians alone. Now that the Americans are preparing to leave, I think it is time for Pakistan to ensure that there is a commitment from the Americans that while they are asking the Taliban to ensure when they leave that the soil of Afghanistan will not be used against the Americans and the American allies. I wonder where they do they place Pakistan in that commitment, because we ought to have that commitment that the soil of Afghanistan will not be used against Pakistan.
Right.
So that tomorrow when TTP and these two organizations start their operations, we must have the political dispensation in Kabul to act against that outfit.
Right.
So, we are continuing to face that threat from Afghanistan, and we are quite well aware that the Indians are sponsoring, financing, arming, training and even providing professional
Training
guidance
right.
to all these organizations. And we have heard from Ahsanullah Ahsan the same thing, we have heard from Kulbhushan Yadav the same thing. So, there is, I think, adequate evidence, and while Pakistan continues to protest to the Indians or to the Afghan government regarding these activities, I think it is time that at the UN level also we need to raise this to the Security Council with adequate evidence.
And Pakistan, I think, has been raising this issue. Mr. Siddique, the way Pakistan has countered these, I would say, most notorious terrorist organizations and individuals operating from Afghanistan, that too is unprecedented. The way Pakistan launched massive military operations inside Pakistan and then fencing the border. So, Pakistan and Pakistan's military strategy has evolved, and we at the moment we want to secure our borders, Afghan border, so that we don't see any more penetration from the Afghan side. How do you evaluate Pakistan's strategy and dealing with the Afghan primarily?
I think Pakistan is the only country in this region which has very effectively countered terrorism in our country and on our borders. Uh, Ever since the Americans attacked Afghanistan following 9/11, Pakistan was the frontline state. Pakistan had to bear the brunt of the situation. Whatever was happening in Afghanistan, the terrorists who were operating in Afghanistan after the American attack, they infiltrated into Pakistan, particularly in the border areas, in the FATA area. So they made their safe havens there, and they tried to destabilize Pakistan. And you know, and I know, and the world also knows that these terrorists were active in Pakistan. They killed hundreds of thousands of people. Innocent people in Pakistan were killed, men, women, and children. And they also attacked the armed forces of Pakistan. Even the general headquarters of Pakistan army was attacked. And they didn't spare
Schools
anyone.
and
The police,
colleges, right?
and the last one, the APS,
Yes.
the most gruesome incident. So Pakistan has very effectively evolved a strategy to fight these terrorists. Pakistan finally, the armed forces of Pakistan, all the three wings, they coordinated their efforts. They launched an attack in Waziristan. The Americans in the Western world was making hue and cry, and they were saying that these terrorists have been able to establish their safe havens in North Waziristan. Pakistan is doing nothing. Pakistan is sitting idle, and Pakistan finally launched a very effective operation there, and these safe havens were completely decimated. Although some remnants are there, and they keep attacking Pakistan army and the troops which are there on patrol, and Pakistan, I think, has learned a lot of lessons. And Pakistan army probably is the most experienced army which has faced this kind of terrorism and terrorist attacks on the armed forces. So Pakistan has a very huge and a very, I think, very, very good experience of fighting terrorism, of eliminating these terrorist attacks, and Pakistan has conducted hundreds of thousands of, I think, intelligence-based operations inside the cities of Pakistan. These terrorists,
and they still continue.
It is continuing, and I think these terrorists had made Pakistani cities unlivable, and therefore I think Pakistan made a very comprehensive strategy. Pakistan army has taken on these elements, and although they are still active, they are being sponsored by India and Afghanistan jointly. But I think that Pakistan is now capable of thwarting and defeating all kinds of terrorism, all manifestations of terrorism in Pakistan. They have a very, very strong experience of that.
Right, certainly. General Razak, talking about this situation, the defense and national security, Pakistan's challenges were manifold, I would say. It wasn't just about fighting the terrorist organizations which were operating inside Pakistan and launching military operations. It was also about countering the propaganda, countering the narrative that was emanated and projected by different countries, international powers regarding Pakistan. And many people think that the aim of such propaganda was to damage Pakistan's prestige and Pakistan's image. Now, Pakistan worked on that as well, on the counter narrative. I remember when Pakistani officials said, and one of our prime ministers said, that Pakistan would not become a scapegoat in Afghanistan. So that was a very, I would say, clear message to the international powers and other countries who have been trying to damage Pakistan's prestige. This counter narrative, how do you see it?
Okay, I think both the narrative and the counter narrative and whatever you said, I think this is part of the two-front war. In fact, a three-front war that Pakistan was compelled to engage with. The hybrid war from the Indian side, then aggression from the eastern border, aggression from the western border, the disinformation campaigns against Pakistan, the financial coercion through the FATF, all these things, I think Pakistan, through its very balanced policies, has come out, I think, very well out of all this. And Pakistan, the people of Pakistan, the armed forces, the government, all the security agencies, they should really be proud of their achievements in the last many decades of how they have been able to secure Pakistan as desired by the Qais, as I made a mention of that at the beginning of your talk. But we still have challenges to face. The challenges that have been talked about by my colleagues and by yourself. And probably those challenges will keep coming. We have been lucky, that we have almost defeated the COVID-19 also. And our, economy is now on the way to recovery from that. The CPEC, despite, all the opposition to that,
Yes.
in the economic attacks on the efforts on China and Pakistan, I think we have succeeded in that also. CPEC is up and moving in the right direction, and inshallah, I am sure that with the efforts of the people, the government, the military and the armed forces, Pakistan is on its way to succeed, to development and to peace and prosperity.
Right, right, certainly. Awais Masha Bhatti, Kashmir is a concern for Pakistan. And it is about Kashmir that the people of Pakistan are concerned about, state of Pakistan, government of Pakistan. Kashmir's importance in Pakistan's national security, its foreign policy, and because of that, the way India and Pakistan have been dealing with each other, that is also very important. How do you see the Indian atrocities at the moment in Indian occupied Kashmir and the way Pakistan has countered the propaganda and exposed India on several fronts? Recently, when Prime Minister Imran Khan went to United Nations General Assembly and called out RSS and Shiv Sena, I would say that was the first time that a Pakistani Prime Minister was actually calling out BJP and backed by right-wing terrorist organizations, I would say.
Well, Pakistan's commitment to Kashmir emanates out of our independence, and we continue to maintain that the Kashmir problem is in fact an unfinished agenda of the partition of the subcontinent. And while we here in Pakistan are enjoying the fruits of freedom, the same are being denied to the Kashmiris. And Pakistanis should and would not rest in in peace until the Kashmiris are able to have their right of self-determination. So that is what Pakistanis and Pakistan owe to them, and hence that is why ever since 1947 Pakistan has stayed committed with their cause and continues to support them. Now, of course, it's about 4 or 5 years ago that we had this Shahadat of Burhan Wani, and ever since then the struggle of the Kashmiris took a new momentum, a renewed momentum, and we find that even young people, even young girls are now joining in that effort. And now seeing this new development, the intensification of this freedom struggle, the Indians following the Israeli formula of suppressing and in fact brutally crushing this movement to non-existence in their own manner or in their own mind. But the fact is that it has now gained enough momentum where it is sustaining itself. Not only that, but it is even gaining more and more momentum. And the Indians, on the other hand, we find that they have even deployed more number of troops, and they continue to follow the Israeli model, and they continue to inflict atrocities over there. And we find that since 5th of August last year, they have locked down the entire state, and they have also abrogated the clauses of the constitution which gave a special status to Kashmir. And it was, as you pointed out, it was for the first time that the world got to hear the exact and true nature of the problem in Kashmir and the situation in Kashmir. And I think when the Prime Minister used a similarity between RSS and Nazi Party, it was for the first time that the world realized how serious was the situation, and how brutal were the tactics being used by the Indian authorities.
So we are short of time. I'll ask Mr. Siddique that this diplomacy on Kashmir and the way Pakistan has been working on it is very important when it comes to the agenda of Kashmir. Exposing RSS and Shiv Sena, exposing BJP and their atrocities in Kashmir is very important. How do you evaluate foreign policy and security on Kashmir?
I think Pakistan has launched a very proactive foreign policy programs, and particularly the diplomatic initiatives that Pakistan has taken. And fortunately, Pakistan was able to convene 3 meetings of United Nations Security Councils on the issue of Kashmir with the support of China. China has been all along with Pakistan on this issue. I think that's a big success. After 50 years, the United Nations Security Council session was held on Kashmir.
And I think almost 3 times since
3
last
times.
year. Yes.
So that's very important. Also, I think Pakistan is proactively launching the diplomatic initiatives in the world's capitals which matter. And Pakistan is doing a lot. But hats off to the Kashmiris, because the Kashmiris are shedding their blood. Kashmiris have risen against the oppression of the Indian forces in occupied Kashmir, and the Kashmiris' voice is being heard all over the world. The United Nations Council for Human Rights has condemned the atrocities being committed by the Indian forces in Indian-held Kashmir. And similarly, other human rights associations have also taken notice of it. The Western media, for the first time, is condemning the brutal actions being taken against the Kashmiris in occupied Kashmir. So I think the world is watching, world is hearing, although we need the world community to do more and come forward to get these Kashmiris their right of self-determination.
Right. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Airbus Marshal Bhatti, pleasure having on the show. Thank you for joining us. Mr. Siddique, thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us. General Raza, pleasure having you on the show. Thank you for your time and thank you for joining us. That's all from today's dialogue. See you next time. Khuda Hafiz.